1, 2, test. Is it coming? 1, 2, 3.
Good evening, everyone. I would ask everyone to please take a seat so we can get started. It's my honor and privilege tonight to introduce our presenter for our parish mission. Many of us know him as S. James Meyer, a best-selling author of several books, including God Plays a Purple Banjo, How to Talk Catholic, Jesus Wears Socks with Sandals, as well as Living with Real Presence, Eucharist as an Approach to Life. The latter being how many of us came to know him and what led us to invite him to lead our parish mission. In addition, he's a Catholic deacon of the Diocese of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and co-founder of Streetlights Outreach and Whatsoever You Do Incorporated. As well, he's a husband to his wife, Michelle, and father of 3 sons, Adam, Alex, and Jacob. Yet those of us who have gotten to know him better know him as simply as Steve, which is fitting given that he has a down-to-earth nature and in touch with who he is as a human being, a beloved child of God. Having read his books and heard 2 of his presentations along with a homily, we know that Steve is a keen observer of humanity. And we appreciate how he has a gift for using those insights through inspired storytelling to bring the gospel alive and to open up for us a greater appreciation of Eucharist and how it transforms us and shapes our lives. So I ask you to join me in welcoming Steve for our final evening of our parish mission. Steve?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. You've all been so kind and generous and hospitable and welcoming, and I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed and appreciated being able to share these last several days with you in so many different conversations, and how enriched I've been by it. So thank you. And just before we get started, lest I forget at the end, I want to make sure that I extend my sincere gratitude to Father John, who disappeared over here. It's like sort of blends into the piano over there. So thank you so much for welcoming me into your community and for doing that. I want to thank Cheryl for being just on top and in front of and so eager in embracing me here in the community. Thank you, Cheryl. I want to thank Katie, who's on the camera. So Katie's been fabulous and wonderful in making sure that we just don't miss a beat with anything here. So thank you to you. Thank you to your entire parish staff for being so kind and generous and welcome. I want to especially make sure I draw out and thank Flom Publishing, 23rd Publishing, and the parent company Bayard Books, who've been generous to support and sponsor this and fly me out here to be with you as well. And Dave has been here the last few nights. Tonight, Wade is here in the back. So if you still want to buy any books, Wade's here and he has them. And of course, I'll be glad to stick around and sign anything as we go forward. But let's begin tonight with failure. Let's begin tonight with Scripture tonight from the Gospel of John. We want to focus tonight on going forth. Last night I introduced this idea that sort of 3 phases of Eucharist, right? That what we do when we come to Mass, offering up our gifts and breaking them open, sharing them, the transubstantiation, that we celebrate, and it's beautiful and it's glorious, it's wonderful, but we can't let it stop there. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is what needs to happen within us. How we are transformed as members of this body of Christ. And then phase 3 is what happens when we leave and we go out in the world and how we share the living embodiment of Christ with the world around us. And so let's just start with John, the Gospel of John. When he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." Please pray with me this mission prayer. Loving Christ, bread of life, wine of compassion, you broke yourself open and poured yourself out to become one with us, for us, in us, and among us. Open our hearts to love as you love, to forgive as you forgive, to serve as you serve, and to break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for others, bringing your real presence to all God's people all the time. Amen. Cheryl picked me up today to take me somewhere, and I got in her car, and as we were driving out onto the road, she said, "I've been thinking so much about what you've been saying the last couple of nights that I've almost had about 4 or 5 accidents already this morning." And I said, "Let me drive." You know what I'm saying? But we all got here safely, just fine. I wanted to start tonight with a story called Jeremiah in Jesus Wears Socks with Sandals. A scrawny wisp of a 10-year-old boy came wheeling up to our Streetlights Outreach block party on a bicycle with only one pedal. He would push down as hard as he could with his right foot, trying to create enough momentum to crank the pedal 360 degrees, and then sort of push along with his left foot. His name was Jeremiah, and I swore that if you stacked the letters of his name on edge, they'd be taller than he was. At first, he was a little shy, refusing the hamburger I offered because he didn't have any money. But once I told him the burgers were free, he gladly devoured one, and then another, and another. This little kid pounded away 6 hamburgers, several mountains of potato chips, and I have no idea how many cookies. Then he shoved a handful of cookies into the pockets of his sweatshirt and said he was going to go tell his brothers and sisters to come over to the park and get something to eat because, he said, we never eat like this at home. "You never get hamburgers at home?" I asked, mostly as a form of active listening. I knew how it was for many of the kids in this neighborhood. They ate breakfast and lunch at school, and dinner was a bit of a crapshoot. But this was July. There was no school. "No," he said. That wasn't what he meant. So he clarified, "We never get to eat until we're not hungry anymore." Go ahead and let that steep in your tea for a moment. Most of us have the privilege of eating until we're full, and many of us keep expanding that capacity. We even joke about it as we age, patting our increased girth with self-deprecating pride. But standing before me in the wealthiest nation in human history was a kid who wasn't talking about eating until he's full. He was talking about never being able to eat until the hunger went away. This is what I do between meals. I snack to make the hunger go away. Could it be, I wondered, that I snack as much or even more than Jeremiah and his siblings eat all day? While all this was going on, a couple of our Spokes of Hope volunteers fixed his bike and gave it a second pedal. As he rode off, Jeremiah was an entirely transformed kid, exploding with hope, excitement, and unquenchable energy. When he returned about 20 minutes later, he had 4 sisters and 2 brothers with him. All were wide-eyed. Then he raced off again to tell some more friends and cousins. In the meantime, his mother showed up at the park to check it out. Her presence anchored the children, and they swarmed our serving lines like a hive of bees with its queen. When we were done for the evening, we packed up all the leftover hamburgers, hot dogs, buns, chips, cookies, and sodas, and we gave it all to her. As her caravan of kids left the park, each loaded with a bag or box full of food, she could be heard saying over and over, "Praise Jesus, praise Jesus, praise Jesus," as tears rolled down her cheeks. For me, this was a resurrection moment and a Eucharist moment. You see, when the Romans crucified Jesus, they didn't just want to kill him. They wanted to kill his entire message and his movement. They wanted to kill hope. To preserve their own power and privilege, they wanted to kill his idea about human value and dignity. They saw these things as dangerous notions. So when Jesus rises from the dead, the entire body of his work, his teaching, rises with him. Love of God and love of neighbor rises to new life. Matthew 25, what you do for the least you do for me, rises from the tomb. The Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, the compassion of the Good Samaritan, the dignity of the leper, the forgiveness and the mercy revealed in the parable of the prodigal son, the value of the woman at the well, and the hope of the centurion whose servant was ill. It all rises to new life. The exact same new life expressed by the woman and her children in the park. Praise Jesus. 2,000 years later, we're still living out that resurrection. Every time we spread love into the world, every time we feed the hungry, comfort the sick, welcome the stranger, we are giving flesh, blood, and breath to the living Christ. We aren't just celebrating resurrection, we become resurrection. And that should fill us all with joy until we're stuffed full with enough extra to shove in our pockets to carry to others. If we don't take Eucharist, if we don't take the living body and blood of Christ that comes within us, if we don't take it into the world, we lose resurrection. We lose Easter. We lose it all. We lose everything, the full body of Jesus' teaching. His belief, his love, his compassion, his kindness, his mercy, his hope. We lose it all if we don't become the Eucharist, allow it to become us, and take it out into the world with us in everything we do. But when we do that, when we do it, we change everything. We change absolutely everything. We change relationships, we change people, we change hearts. We need to have a conversation in our church and in our culture about the difference between helping and serving. between helping and serving. When we help people, we retain the power within ourselves. We see other people as lacking, as needing, as hurting, as broken, and we see ourselves as the source that can fix them, help them in whatever way needs to be addressed. But Jesus doesn't ask us to be helpers. He asks us to be servants. In the great story of the foot washing, he takes on the role of the servant. Because when we serve, we raise the other person up. We raise them up, and we respect them, and we value them accordingly. We have so many conflicts, so many arguments, so many debates, so much energy churning in our culture right now because we keep trying to change the world by changing laws. And I'm not suggesting that we abdicate our responsibility in a democracy to participate in that. But my friends, if you think we're going to build the kingdom of God by changing human laws, oh, we are coming so short. We're not called to change laws. We're called to change hearts. We're called to love. When asked what is the first commandment, Jesus doesn't say, lobby hard and hit up Facebook and convince all your friends they need to think differently. He says, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. We're going to transform our hearts and to transform ourselves and transform our world. We need to do it by sharing the love of Christ, the love given to us in the Eucharist. It all and always starts with an attitude of servitude, of recognizing that I am not the source of anyone's transformation. I'm merely the conduit of God's love, Christ's Eucharist, coming to me, through me, and into the world. As long as we think we're the ones who have the answers and the resources, and we see others as broken and failing, needing us to help them, we're giving ourselves the power instead of giving God the power. But when we see ourselves as the servants, the foot washer, on our knees, lifting others up, raising others up, just allowing the love of Christ given to us in Eucharist to come through us and serve the world, we have a chance. We have a chance of changing hearts. To do that, we're invited to see what I call to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Once we do that, once we take on this reality that we are actually just participants in something that's so marvelous, so beautiful, so grand, we're able to just enter into it and see that, oh my gosh, all of life is gift. All of life is joy. It's here for us to just absorb and become part of. This is a story in God Plays a Purple Banjo called Bare Feet on Vinyl Floors. Arriving home from work when Alex was 3 years old was an amazing treat. In retrospect, even saying it sounds ridiculous. Who looks forward to dealing with a 3-year-old after a long day of coping with corporate politics? Some might suggest, with tongues only partially lodged in cheeks, it was just more of the same. but Alex had a way of exploding with joy when I walked through the door. It was ridiculously contagious. No matter how difficult or stressful a day may have been, Alex erased the clouds and beamed sunshine. As soon as I stepped across the threshold, he would come running, his small bare feet slapping the vinyl floor as he raced across the kitchen, and with arms extended, he'd leap up and give me a great big welcome home. One day, when feeling particularly worn down, the type of day where you ask yourself why you even bother, I opened the door, and sure enough, my answer came in the swift patter of Alex flying through the house. I scooped him into my arms, gazed into his eyes as wide as the Montana sky, and I said, "I love you, Alex. I love you as much as one person can possibly love another." With a bright face as full of delight as a Sunday morning in May, Alex looked back into my eyes and said, "I'm going to hit you, Daddy." I laughed until my eyes watered. Alex was teasing, of course. He was joy-filled and held no malice. He was merely expressing his good-natured way of throwing me off balance, a personality cornerstone he has maintained into adulthood. On that particular evening, with my spirit crawling in the back alley of defeat, Alex brought me back to life. In that moment, I discovered how love could indeed expand in all directions. I learned we're able to touch heaven from earth just as surely as Christ touched earth from heaven. That's the glory of love right there, an ordinary moment in time that's made extraordinary by the love shared between two people. When Jesus turns water into wine, he takes something very ordinary, water, and he makes it extraordinary, wine. And he does it at a wedding, a celebration of love so divine that it empowers two ordinary people to become co-creators with God. In other words, when we drink in the awesome miracle of ever-expanding love, this rather mundane, ordinary life takes on a whole new rich and vibrant flavor. We're suddenly able to taste sacredness and laughter. We're aware that a meal shared with others is divine. The hug of a child, the embrace of a grandparent, and the smile of a stranger become encounters with the very real presence of a very real Christ. Water becomes wine. Wine becomes the blood of Christ. And Christ becomes you and me. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. When we crowd out or close off the miracle of infinite love, we miss the divine poetry of life. God and humanity become distant and separate again. Relationships go flat and stale. The water never becomes wine. We don't see the blood of Christ in the cup. Perhaps the stone jars of our culture sit empty far too often, void of Christ's selfless compassion. Have we crowded out and grown increasingly blind to the divine presence of God's love in our world? It's as though the wedding is winding down and the evening is getting dull. The wine of the Spirit has gone dry. We have everything, yet our children are bored. People strap parachutes to themselves and jump off buildings to give themselves thrills. We spend dead time hours watching shows like The Bachelor, which means we are so bored we watch someone else's fabricated reality. It's actually quite bizarre. We are stressed out, overtired, and weary with anxiety. We keep chasing the next artificial high, hoping we can feel joy again. With designer handbags, bigger boats, more exotic vacations, and faster downloads, we're able to add artificial flavors and sweeteners and perhaps a few bubbles to the drab water of life. We can turn the water into Diet Coke, but we can't turn it into the fruit of the vine. Only the love of Christ can do that. Only the love of God can make the ordinary extraordinary. This is something God has done throughout time. An old anonymous nomad named Abraham, the abandoned slave infant called Moses, the smallest, youngest, most unlikely son of a sheep herder who was called David, a poor peasant girl from the backwoods named Mary, and her seemingly illegitimate son, Jesus, a ragamuffin fisherman called Peter, a murderous Pharisee named Paul, extremely ordinary people made extraordinary by the love of God. In turning water into wine, Jesus invites us to open our eyes to the divine love of God in ourselves and in everyone else. The lifeblood of the party is right here. It's right now, before our very eyes. But it's not where you expect it to be. The ordinary is extraordinary. Can you see it in yourself, in your neighbor, in every human being created in God's own image and likeness? Can you see it? And even more so, to the point in dealing with ourselves and our own spirituality and our own experience of Eucharist when we leave here and go in the world, can others see it in you? In every conversation, every encounter, every moment, do people sense when they are with you or among you that there's something extraordinary going on? That the living Christ, the Eucharist, is alive in you? Do they see that the mundane is magnificent and the ordinary is extraordinary? When we get into the world, we realize nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop the through flow of love from God into us, transformed into the world. Nothing can stop it but us. Nothing. No law, no rule, no rubric, no restriction. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop it. And yet we spend so much of our time and energy and effort complaining, griping, arguing, and fighting about the laws, rules, rubrics, regulations, and restrictions. And they have no power unless we give them power. Because we are not people of power, we are people of service. We are servants. Nothing can stop us from serving. One of the questions I get asked most often as I travel and talk to people, at some point, inevitably someone's going to ask, how do you feel about the Catholic Church's position on who is and is not eligible for Holy Communion? And my response is always, I am an ordained deacon who's a guest in your diocese and we're on a live stream. Do you really think I'm going to answer that question? However, I say, we spend so much time asking that question about a canonical rule or law. instead of asking ourselves a more spiritual question about what am I doing to welcome all people into the body of Christ. The bigger question each of us should be asking is what difference does that make to me in my mission in life? Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't participate in the conversations and the dialogue or diminish it, but that's not the answer. The answer is within us. How much of my life, how much of my conversation, how much of my prayer, how much of my action, my energy, my joy, how much of me am I channeling into bringing the living embodiment of Christ's flesh and blood into the world in service to others? Do this in memory of me. Jesus doesn't say, do, a rules evaluation, rewrite your rubrics in memory of me. No. Do this in memory of me. This, go forth. As I have done, you should also do. The path forward is a path toward unity and harmony and peace and love. And that's an experience. And an experience that comes to us, changes us, and works through us into the world. I just wanted to close out this time we spent missioning together with the final words of Living with Real Presence. Don't you like how every time I reference one of my books, I have to look at the cover to see the title? What's the title of that thing again? It's like I'm reading someone else's work. If someone had told the 21-year-old me that I would become a spiritual author and one day write the book I'm holding in my hand, I would have wondered what they had stirred into their coffee. Seriously, I would have thought they were a remarkably poor judge of a human character, clearly disengaged from reality. Yet here we are. Funny how God works. None of this was in my vision for my life. My notion was to use my talents to become a political satirist. I imagined myself writing witty books and columns that laid bare the truth about human society in a way people could no longer deny or ignore. This is how I would help humanity grow toward harmonic unity with one another. Yeah, I was ridiculously naive. The younger me wanted to change the world by changing the laws, the rules, how people think. Eventually I grow to understand I would change the rule by touching hearts, by sharing the love of Christ. Also, however, I was keenly aware that I oughtn't to be in charge of my own life. I mean, goodness. I was the type of guy who wore a Bart Simpson t-shirt that said, "Don't have a cow," to the birth of his own child. A guy like that shouldn't try to run his own show. My only saving grace was in recognizing this about myself. So I agreed to a very sincere arrangement with God. God runs the show, and I do the grunt work. God leads, and I follow. Not surprisingly, God chose to lead me down a path other than political satire. For this, I am grateful. Eventually, I grew to understand and appreciate that our Creator has a far greater interest in moving hearts and stirring souls than in making laws. I won't speculate as to the reasons or the wisdom for that, but that's how Christ went about his work as well. Jesus gifted us with a much better path to walk toward a life of unity, harmony, peace, and love, Eucharist. And I submit, my friends, that if we really, honestly live Eucharist, if we as a community of people coming together actually fully embodied the bread and the wine, the body and blood of Christ, and allowed it to change our hearts, and took it out and let that fire run free in the streets, that our churches would be packed and full. We want to know why everyone's complaining, why are our pews empty? Well, our pews empty are because people are looking at us and saying, I don't see impact. I don't see effect. I don't see love coming into the world through you. And if we did that, if we brought love into the world, the laws, the rules, the rubrics, they would be, all of the things that govern us would follow, because the hearts of people would follow. It would absolutely come into place. Jesus gifted us with a much better plan to walk toward a life of unity, harmony, peace, and love, Eucharist. We needn't rely on the proceedings of government and other civil structures to pave humanity's way toward happiness and joy. We can do it ourselves by breaking bread together. Nothing can stop us. The question I am most often asked by friends and family members who have wandered from their Catholic roots, whether actively or passively, is, why do I stay? Their perspective is often coming from a broken heart, a heart that has felt the Christ-like pain of betrayal or rejection. Most often, it's an honest question more than a challenging one. Why do I stay? The answer is easy and obvious for me. Eucharist. Once we open ourselves to the deeper mystery of real presence, we are able to glimpse the magnificence of the gift. The body and blood of Christ is so much more than a physical specimen. It is a soothing balm, a healing salve. It is hope, compassion, and mercy. It is the promise delivered and the potential realized of unity between Creator, creating, and creation. It is love. It is love. And it is given to us freely, asking only that we open ourselves to it. Again and again, I am reminded that I am broken and on a journey toward wholeness. We all are, I suppose. The gift of Eucharist and the joy of living a Eucharistic way of life brings us into real presence with God, with self, with others, and with all creation. Here we find wholeness. I pray the fruits of my labors, the work of my hands, helps you find a deeper, life-defining engagement with the love of Christ. Please pray with me our mission prayer. Loving Christ, bread of life, wine of compassion, you broke yourself open and poured yourself out to become one with us, for us, in us, and among us. Open our hearts to love as you love, to forgive as you forgive, to serve as you serve, and to break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for others, bringing your real presence to all God's people all the time. Amen. thank you so very much for these past several days. I wanted to leave a little extra time tonight for dialogue, conversation, questions, arguments, fights, joy. Yes.
How did you come to know that you should write a book?
There's a microphone someplace. Oh, thank you. The question was, how did I come to know that I should write the book? It's like, I didn't plan on writing the book. I will tell you that for many years, I felt as though we were shortchanging Eucharist. For many years, I felt like we were treating it merely as an object. We were objectifying it. We weren't allowing it to transform us. You know, we weren't letting it be who we are. So that was sort of in the back of my mind that, boy, you know, we don't really go deep with this. We take what we were taught as 8-year-olds, what First Communion is, and we leave it there, and we don't really go deep. So that was at the back of my mind, but this wasn't the type of book I had intended to write. And then I got a call one day from the person who's my editor at 23rd Publishing, and they got a call from their parent company saying, the United States is doing this Eucharistic revival, and we think you should bring out a book on Eucharist, and we would like you to have S. James Meyer write it. So Heidi called me, and the conversation went like this: Steve, I'm calling with a question, and you're going to say no. So I'm going to ask you not to say no, but only just hear the question and agree to listen and walk with it for a few days. And then she told me that they wanted me to write a book on Eucharist. And I said, yes. Yes. I mean, it's like, in hearing the question, I felt the answer. And the answer was, this is not what you're being asked to do, this is what you're being called to do. So I just said, yes. And this was in October of 2022, I believe. Maybe 2021. Anyway, it was in October, and she said, oh, and by the way, we're giving you a deadline of April 30th. And whoa, that's a problem. But anyway, that was, so I was asked to write it, and in listening to the question, I felt like it wasn't a question, it was a calling. So I agreed to do it. I had no idea what the content of this book would be. You know, my writing process on this book was very prayer focused and centered. It was so important to me in writing this book that I got myself out of the way. That it's like if I had to let the message flow through me, not come from me. So that process was really, really important to me. And I couldn't write unless I was able to really sit down and let go of everything so that could happen. Anybody else? Yes.
When you said we have to serve all God's people all the time, who are all God's people? Is that everybody?
Like, you know, we're given that great story, you know, of you know, Jesus being asked, you know, about the greatest commandment. And he says, love your neighbor as yourself, you know, and that's answering the question, who is my neighbor? That comes next, that's everybody. Everybody's your neighbor. Every person. And then we're given story after story after story in the Gospels of him reaching out and serving the people who were so widely understood to be the other. Right? So it was, whether it was the Samaritan person who was an enemy, or the leper who you don't dare touch, or the woman at the well to whom speaking was taboo. I mean, there's all these stories of Jesus role modeling for us who all God's people are. They're everybody that we come in contact with, all God's people. Anyone else? Oh, the pastor. This is going to be a test.
No, I'm just interested in the image on the front cover of the book. I realize you may not have been involved in picking that, but any significance in it?
Thank you for that question about the image on the cover of the book. Yes, one of the things people don't realize about the publishing world is that the author owns copyright of the contents of the book. The publisher owns the cover. Right, so I usually hold my breath and wait for the cover to come out. They don't design the cover until they read the manuscript. And then there are people who do that. I've published enough with them that I am given the opportunity to offer input a little bit, and on title and on cover, but it's ultimately their decision. But I don't usually see it until it's done. It's out. It's, when it shows up in the trade catalog, that's sometimes the first time I see the cover. But one of the inputs I did offer on this particular book was that I didn't want the cover to be religious. I wanted it to be more spiritual. I wanted it to be experiential. I said I don't want anything too churchy on the cover. Because this whole book is about how we are approaching our lives, letting Eucharist flow through us into the world and the life. So the artists at 23rd Publishing who do the cover designs came up with this, and I was just delighted. I was just delighted with it. The hands of service, reaching out, in reaching to God, reaching to one another, reaching to the light, reaching in prayer, just reaching and opening up, ready to receive, ready to give, realizing that it's all the same experience. So. And the light reflects back, which is really kind of a tricky thing with the sun behind it. But, Photoshop, how cool is that? And so, another question, yes?
So this is more of a comment about, so Jesus is asked, who is my neighbor, right? And then I'm thinking about, I think it was I can't remember which of the books I read, but I think you talk about living inside out instead of outside in, right? So the question, who is my neighbor, is an outside in question, right? And Jesus' answer is, you have to be a neighbor to them, right? So you're it's almost saying, let me be your neighbor, right? To whoever you meet, right? Not, you are my neighbor, you're the neighbor I have to love. Let me love you as the neighbor to make you my neighbor.
That's a really brilliant application and understanding of it. Thank you. And while I know you brought that disposition to your read, I'm going to pretend that you took it from the read. Okay. but I write in one of the themes in my writing, and there's a big, and it's a major piece of the new book, Live Like You Mean It, is the direction in which we live our lives. Because we're so conditioned to live our lives from the outside in. What am I getting? What does this experience mean to me? How does this affect me? How do I feel about this? And because so much of our life thinking is what we'll call egocentric, I'm the center of my experience, we don't ever check that. It's just how we automatically go about all of our decision making and relationships in the world. But really what we're called to do, and I think what Eucharist calls us to do, is to live in the other direction, from the inside out. Not asking, what experience am I getting? How are other people affecting me? What's going to happen to me in this? But rather to be asking, how am I affecting others? How do other people feel when they're in conversation with me? How am I having an impact? And how am I sharing love in the world? So yeah, the question when asked, who is my neighbor, suggests it comes from that frame of reference I'm me, individual here, and who do I really need to care about, but the call, I think the way that Jesus reverses it in everything he says and does is we're living in the wrong direction. We have to live from the inside out. We have to let the love of God come to us, come within us, transform us, and flow through us into the world. How am I touching the lives of other people? All God's people. Oh, yes.
Is holiness altruism?
There we go. I'm going to give you that.
Is holiness altruism?
Is holiness altruism? It's like, I suppose it depends on who you ask, honestly. I think that the holiness, the way Christ teaches it to us, is certainly altruistic. Certainly. But if your disposition of holy is, very individualistic, and very, very, very reverential and pious without an outward flow. If your primary agenda in being holy is to get yourself into heaven, whatever that might be, going back to last night's presentation, if you're coming at holiness from an egocentric perspective, and I've had this conversation with people, I do this so that I can get to heaven, then who are you really serving? You're not really serving anyone but yourself. So I don't know that form of holiness is altruistic. But I will leave that conversation to each individual in their own examination, of their own spirituality. But I think the holiness that Christ calls us to is absolutely altruistic. 80.
I have a question from here, and I don't have a microphone. Sorry. So Shirley from our stream says, what's your next book going to invite us to do or live?
Well, I have that answer if by your next book you mean the one that's coming out the beginning of May here that you've gotten a preview of, the Live Like You Mean It. which really invites us to examine our call, really invites us to our purpose, how we are called to live out the living, real presence of Christ in the world throughout our lifetime. The next one after that, and I'm interested in your feedback and conversation afterwards. There's I have to do a little bit of writing I've agreed to do over the summer, but what I'm hoping to do next fall is begin on a book that's formulating in my mind on our understanding of God. And open that up. And I got there after many conversations with people who have or were introduced to a very childlike understanding of God. And then they got to be a little bit older, got to be teenagers or even adults, and said, I don't really believe in that anymore. This God as, the Santa Claus God, punisher or rewarder, it's omnipotent judge of all humanity, or however it was introduced to them at the time. And they'd never been introduced to a deeper, more profound understanding of God as Alpha, Omega, as the great I am, as all that is, all that was, all that ever shall be, as the love that we share, the love that we become and enter into. But this idea of really who is God? How do I encounter God? How do I experience God? How do I share God in the lived experience? How do I really do that? So I'm toying around with that idea. I don't know how people who go to church every week feel about that. When I've talked to people who aren't going to church every week, they're like, yeah, I want that book. But anyway, that's kind of taking form in my head right now. So, yes.
Catholic Family Services does amazing work everywhere with very marginalized populations. And lots of parishes also do phenomenal work, like Southeast Catholic. But the bishops, a long time ago, said there were 2 feet in love for social justice. One was, I think the word they used was charity, direct service, and the other was advocacy. Advocacy is much harder for us. How do you see real presence and advocacy, given you said laws, regulations, all that stuff?
It's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. The question is, how do there's 2 tenets to Catholic social teaching, for lack of one thrust is action, the other is advocacy, and I think it is really important that we do participate in the public conversation, the public dialogue. I remind myself constantly, though, of St. Francis's words, preach the gospel always, if necessary, use words. So we can be advocates in our action and our attitude and our love and our kindness. But I do think it is important in so many public policies, especially those that affect the community, that affect the environment and creation, affect our attitude toward God's great gift of life, all the way through to be advocates. I'm a little bit concerned that we narrow our voice of advocacy to one merely of changing a policy or a law, and not one, and we come at it from a perspective of influencing power rather than sharing love. Right, so the question I have on advocacy on an individual or collective level is, what's our disposition? I think motivation matters. Is our disposition one of exercising earthly power, or is it one of advancing God's gift of love into the world? So I'm all in favor of advocacy, not that being for it or against it should even be a thing, but I think we're called to do it from a disposition of a loving heart. And how do we bring love to life in the world around us? Anybody else? When I do this, this is sign language for any other questions. Give a mouse a cookie.
So you were saying, how do we fill our pews? That's a question I hear all the time, and it's probably a question I've heard ever since I was ordained 19 years ago. And you're suggesting that, it's by activating ourselves and really living out what we do here. So in terms of, do you have any advice, practical advice about how a community discovers what that is? I mean, I guess I could take a lawn chair and go sit on a corner, but do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great question, and I get asked this question a lot, right? It's like this pivotal question that we've been wrestling with as a church for a couple of generations. Let's be honest. I mean, this is not a new question. We've been asking it for the last 30 years. When Bishop Dan Felton, who's now bishop in the Diocese of Duluth, Minnesota, was the vicar general in the Green Bay Diocese, I got called to a meeting over at the Chancery, which, by the way, is never a good day. Steve, you gotta go to the Chancery. But I go over there, and Dan, Bishop Felton, to his credit, he holds up a sheet of paper and he said, "These are all of the initiatives that we've had over the last 10 years to get people more engaged, to get them back to church." And there are several really good organized programs and initiatives, money spent on all sorts of different things. And then he holds up another piece of paper and says, "These are the results." And every metric was in decline. So 10 years of this is what we have to show for it. Clearly, we need to admit to ourselves that what we're doing isn't and hasn't worked. I don't think we even know how to talk to people who aren't us. So can you help us figure that out? So a couple colleagues and I, we embarked on a diocesan-wide qualitative research study, and we talked with groups of people who were engaged Catholics, people who were not necessarily engaged, but they were still attending church on a regular basis, or had still on the rolls, members of a church, but not necessarily engaged a lot. We had a group of people that were Catholics who had nothing to do with the church anymore at all, and we had groups of people that were not Catholic. And we had groups of people that were under the age of 45 and people who were over the age of 45. And we had groups of people that were rural and groups of people that were urban. And we really got a broad sampling of folks, and we listened. We just went out and we listened. And we listened to why they didn't come anymore, why those who did, what held them back, what the objections were. And we were really looking for language that would open people and engage them. So we had all of these messaging concepts, and we tested the language. And the one approach, the one message that resonated with everybody universally, no matter of their level of involvement, their age, whether they were even Catholic or not Catholic, the one message that everyone said, yes, yes, that makes me feel good about the Catholic Church. I want to be part of that. And some people even said, where is that? I want to be part of that church, was the social justice message. It was the message of action, the message of feeding the hungry, taking care of the sick, making sure people have clean water. It was the message of basically taking the gospel and activating it in the world. That was the message that everyone, almost universally, there was a small subset of the highly engaged church-going Catholics whose primary interest level was a salvation message, but no one else was buying that message at all. Across the board, everyone else wanted the outreach message. And that was so universal and so clear. I was in Florida at a parish before Easter, a couple weeks before Easter, I think the fourth week of Lent maybe. This is a parish of about 500 units, right, in Daytona Beach. They get 1,200 people to Mass every week. Their church is full. It's packed. They're not asking the question, how do we get more people to come to Mass? They're asking the question, how do we get more people to do all the stuff we're doing in the world? They have a bunch of their own programs. That they have their own pantry program and some other things that they do that are wonderful, but even more so, they're looking at all of the other outreach programs in the community, and they're sending teams of their people to be part of it and support it. When the Literacy Council of Daytona has their annual gala, their parish buys a couple of tables and sends people. They want a visible image. They want everyone in the world, in the community, to know that the people of this community are active and working and supporting and making a difference in the world. They're also an extraordinarily welcoming community. They're obsessed with making sure that they do hospitality unlike anyone I've ever seen. They've got, everyone comes in. They make sure they welcome everybody as they are, where they are. Before I'd been there, and I still think this is an important answer to the question, I think the question we're asking is the wrong question, and the Holy Spirit is nudging us to ask the question in the other direction. Because we're asking the question, how do we get more people to come unto us? That's an outside-in question. And the question I think the Holy Spirit is asking us, or challenging us with, is how do we bring the church to the people? How do we make it alive out in the world? Change the direction. I'm like, if we keep asking all of these people who aren't coming here to come here, and it's not working. It turns out that they're not going to meet us where we're at until we go and meet them where they're at. So if you want to get the next generation of people, if you want to get, to really activate the parish life, it's not activated by who comes through these doors. It's about the heart we take out of these doors into the world and share it and spread it. And that's, to me, from my experience, what I've witnessed, and from the research I've done, very loud and clear and consistent. So, yes.
Not that I'm asking you to put God aside, but would you please write a book about that soon?
I'm being asked, what I have to write on this summer is I've been asked to write just a small book, 32 pages, on how to talk to people who aren't coming to church. And the first section of that, I probably shouldn't tell you while we're streaming, but talk to me afterwards. But I don't want to be putting out into the universe things that I haven't run past the publisher yet. But the disposition, let's say, of that, how do we talk to people outside the church, is really starts with meet them as they are, where they are. You know, we have to start with our own mindset in how we're engaging them.
I was wondering if you would consider putting any of this on DVDs or whatever. I'd love to see, especially the thing about Will You Talk to Me on Monday, being like youth groups and things like that, or even coming into schools, because lots of times, like in an assembly or something, because I think if we can reach the kids, then maybe they're going to be coming with that thought, going to college and continue.
So I'll offer, thank you for that. And you're not the first person to say, Steve, get your act together, because that's, because I hear, excuse me, I hear that message. I need to beef up my game, which means I have to sell enough books in order to buy insurance so I can quit my job and do more of this. But we're not there yet. And but the videos from your mission will all be available online. Right, Katie? People will be able to access these for a while, so that you can cut them up, edit them, or whatever you want to have them available. I do post my homilies online when I preach, which because I'm not home isn't as much as it used to be. But so there are some things out there. If you go to, I'm on Vimeo. I left YouTube a few years back and switched to Vimeo because that way you can watch without ads. You just click right on. So if you go to vimeo.com/Steve Meyer, that's it. Just vimeo.com/Steve Meyer. There's a lot of homilies and other messages and stuff out there. But yes, I do hear what you're saying, and I should pick up my game. Thank you for the nudge. Anyone else? Again? If not, I thank you so much for the time you shared with me these last few days, and for inviting me to be here with you. And we've got refreshments in the back. I'll be glad to stick around and be here for the next, until they shut the lights off. So, thank you.